Millions live with it every day, told it's permanent, told there's nothing to be done. But the body does not lie, and neither does the science behind it. Somewhere between gravity and the way we breathe lies the answer they were never given. By the end of this briefing, you will understand exactly why your ribcage moved, and exactly what it takes to bring it back. Welcome back to Dr. Lee. If you're joining us for the first time, settle in. You found the right place. Every week we sit down and take a careful, honest look at the health questions that matter most, without the noise and without the shortcuts. Now, before we get into today's briefing, if you found real value in what we do here, take just a moment to hit that subscribe button. Think of it as pulling up a chair at the table. It costs you nothing, but it means the next briefing finds its way straight to you. No searching required. And we'd love to know who's with us today. Drop a comment below and let us know what city, what town, what corner of the world you're watching from. We read every single one, and it's always good to know just how far this table stretches. Now let's get into it. For millions of people around the world, the same question keeps coming up. Why does the lower back arch so deeply? Why does the rib cage sit so far forward? Why does it feel almost impossible to fully engage the abdominal muscles, no matter how much effort is put in? Doctors and trainers have a name for this pattern. It is called a rib flare. And for a long time, people have been told the same thing, that this is simply how their body is built, that nothing can be done to change it, that they should learn to live with it. But that explanation does not hold up under closer examination, because a rib flare is not a birth defect. It is not a random flaw in the design of the body. It is a structural adaptation, a response, a reaction to a force that never stops acting on the human body. That force is gravity. Every person on this planet is engaged in a constant, silent struggle against it. The body must find a way to stay upright, hour after hour, day after day, without collapsing forward or falling backward. To do this, the body uses a strategy. It shifts its center of mass. Specifically, it shifts the weight of the internal organs, and everything inside the torso slightly forward. This is not a conscious decision. It happens automatically, guided by muscles and connective tissue working in the background. But this shift comes at a cost. When the internal contents of the body move forward, the muscles along the back must respond. They contract, they squeeze, and in doing so, they push the rib cage forward as well. At the same time, the sides of the rib cage are pulled inward. The overall shape of the rib cage changes. It becomes longer, front to back, and narrower, side to side. This altered shape is what creates the visible flare. It is often paired with an increased curve in the lower back, and sometimes a slight backward tilt in the upper back, as the body works to keep its balance. Here is where the widespread misunderstanding begins. Many assume that if the rib cage has simply moved forward, then the fix should be simple as well. Push it back into place. Force it into a new position. But that approach ignores something critical. The muscles and tissues of the body carry tension even at rest. And for people with a pronounced rib flare, that resting tension is already biased toward the back of the body. This bias is what pulls the rib cage and its contents forward in the first place. Simply pushing the rib cage backward does nothing to correct that underlying bias. It does not reduce the tension. It does not shift the resting position of the internal organs. It only repositions bone temporarily without changing the forces acting on it. The moment the effort stops, the rib cage returns to where it started. This explains why so many attempts to correct a rib flare fail. People are treating a structural problem as if it were a postural one. They are adjusting the outcome without addressing the cause. To create lasting change, the shape of the rib cage itself must change. Not just its position in space, but its actual form, how it sits, how it compresses, how it expands. And that requires a different approach entirely, one that works with the body's own mechanics rather than fighting against them. One that uses a process every person already performs, without thinking, thousands of times a day. Breathing. The way a person breathes has a direct and measurable effect on the shape of the rib cage. Done correctly, it can gradually retrain the position of the ribs, reduce the forward bias, and allow the body to hold a new, more stable structure. Done incorrectly, it reinforces the very pattern a person is trying to escape. This is the mechanism at the center of this entire briefing. The same system responsible for creating a rib flare is the system capable of correcting it. Understanding why the problem exists is only the first step. The next step is understanding why the most common attempts to fix it consistently fall short. That is where this analysis turns next. Across gyms, clinics, and living rooms everywhere, the same pattern repeats itself. A person notices their rib flare. They decide to fix it, and they reach for the most obvious solution available. They try to force the rib cage back into place. At first glance, this seems logical. If the ribs have moved forward, then pushing them backward should solve the problem. But this is where the first major failure begins. When a person forces their ribs down, using raw muscular effort, something important does not happen. The actual shape of the rib cage does not change, only its angle shifts temporarily under strain. The diaphragm, which should be rising during this correction, stays exactly where it was. The internal organs, which should be settling upward, remain pushed down. Nothing about the internal structure improves. All that changes is the surface appearance, and only for as long as the effort is maintained. The moment the muscles relax, the rib cage returns to its original position. This is not correction, this is compensation, and compensation does not last. The second common failure involves the exhale. Many people attempt to reduce their rib flare through breath work, which is a step in the right direction. But the execution falls short. The exhale is too shallow, too soft, too incomplete. Without a full controlled release of air, the rib cage never receives the signal it needs to close and settle into a smaller, more stable shape. The lower abdomen may tighten slightly, but not enough. The rib cage may shift, but only slightly and never in a way that holds. A partial exhale produces a partial result, and a partial result cannot undo years of structural bias. The third failure is perhaps the most overlooked, and it happens during the inhale. A person may successfully exhale, may successfully bring the rib cage into a better position, only to lose that progress the instant they breathe back in. In some cases, the body simply releases all the tension gained during the exhale, as though the previous effort never happened. In other cases, a different mistake occurs. The person tries to hold the position by bracing harder, tightening further, clamping down in an attempt to keep the ribs from moving. This creates a new problem. Excess pressure builds internally with nowhere to go. The lower abdomen pushes outward under that pressure, undoing the very correction that was just achieved. And critically, this overbracing blocks expansion in the upper portions of the rib cage, expansion that is required to keep the lower ribs stable and in their new position. Each of these three failures shares a common root. They treat the rib flare as a problem of willpower rather than a problem of mechanics. They assume that enough effort, applied directly to the ribs, will eventually force lasting change, but the body does not work this way. Bone position cannot be permanently altered through force alone. It can only be altered by changing the tension patterns and internal pressures that govern it in the first place. This is the same reason that short-term interventions, applied without addressing root causes, tend to produce short-term results at best. The rib cage will always return to the position dictated by the tension and pressure system surrounding it, regardless of how many times it is manually pushed elsewhere. This leads to the central distinction that separates temporary fixes from lasting correction. Changing the position of the rib cage is not the same as changing its shape. Position can be forced briefly through muscular effort. Shape can only be changed gradually through a controlled and repeatable process that retrains how the body breathes, holds tension, and distributes internal pressure. Until that distinction is understood and applied correctly, every attempt at correction will follow the same disappointing cycle. Effort, temporary change, regression, repeat. A lasting solution requires abandoning this cycle entirely and adopting a fundamentally different operational approach, one built not on force, but on precision. That approach begins with a single, deliberate breathing sequence, broken into exact, repeatable phases. That sequence is where this analysis turns next. Every lasting correction begins the same way, not with force, not with willpower, but with a single, precise sequence of breath, broken into distinct, repeatable phases. This sequence is not complicated, but it must be executed exactly in the correct order, or the entire process collapses back into the same failed patterns already examined. The first phase is the inhale. It must be quiet, controlled, taken in through the nose without strain, without lifting the shoulders, without allowing the rib cage to flare further forward as air enters. Many people fail at this very first step without realizing it. They inhale in a way that reinforces the exact pattern they are trying to correct. And the second phase is the exhale, and this is where the real work happens. The exhale must be long, slow, complete. Not rushed, not shallow, not stopped halfway. As the air leaves the body, attention must shift to the lower abdomen. It should visibly draw inward, growing smaller as the exhale continues. This is not a cosmetic detail. It is a direct signal to the rib cage that it is time to change shape, not just position. As the exhale nears its end, something measurable begins to happen. The lower rib cage starts to drop, slightly, backward. Not because it is being forced there, but because the internal pressure system finally allows it. This is the moment many previous attempts have missed entirely. The ribs are not being pushed. They are being permitted to return to a more neutral position because the tension responsible for pulling them forward has finally been addressed. The third phase is the most overlooked and the most critical. It is the inhale that follows. This is where nearly all previous corrective attempts fail, even when the exhale was performed correctly. The goal here is not to breathe in and let everything reset. It is also not to clamp down and brace harder in an attempt to hold the position by force. Both approaches undo the work just completed. Instead, the exact amount of tension gained during the exhale must be maintained, no more and no less, as the next breath enters the body. This requires control. It requires attention. And it requires resisting two very natural, very common instincts, both of which lead back to failure. Once this three-phase sequence, inhale, exhale, and sustained inhale, can be performed correctly while lying still, the next principle becomes critical. Correction cannot be built entirely in stillness. It must eventually be tested and reinforced across a range of physical positions, each one placing a different level of demand on the body. This is where the concept of progressive load becomes central to the entire protocol. It is not effective, and often not even possible, to begin this corrective work in the most demanding positions available. A rib cage that has spent years locked into a forward flared pattern cannot be expected to immediately hold a corrected position while standing, moving, or bearing weight. Attempting this too soon almost always results in a return to old compensations, the same forceful pushing and bracing already shown to fail. Instead, the body must be introduced to this new breathing pattern gradually, starting in positions where gravity itself provides assistance rather than resistance. From there, the demand can be increased in careful, measured steps, only advancing once the previous stage has been fully mastered. This is not a matter of convenience. It reflects a basic operational principle. Any system being retrained, whether a physical structure or otherwise, must first establish a stable baseline under low demand, before that stability can be expected to hold under greater pressure. Skip this step, and the entire process becomes fragile, prone to failure the moment real-world conditions are introduced. Respect this step, and each new position becomes an opportunity to reinforce what was already gained, rather than a risk of losing it. What follows is the complete sequence, moving from the most supported starting position through increasingly demanding stages, and ultimately toward application under real functional movement. Each stage builds directly on the one before it. None can be skipped without consequence. This progression is where the corrective protocol moves from concept into practice, and where lasting structural change finally becomes possible. The corrective sequence now moves from principle into full, structured application. Every stage that follows builds directly on the breathing pattern already established. None of them work in isolation. Each one exists to prepare the body for the stage that comes next. The starting position is one of the most supported available, lying face down. In this position, gravity pulls the body's internal contents forward and downward, which mirrors the exact bias already present in a flared rib cage. This is intentional. Rather than fighting that bias, the body begins by working with it, using the ground itself as a natural boundary. As the person exhales, using the exact sequence already established, the arms press gently into the ground, and the upper body lifts slightly without forcing the ribs downward. The lower ribs remain in contact with the ground throughout, which prevents the rib cage from drifting further forward. This position must be fully mastered, breath by breath, before advancing further. From there, the demand increases slightly. The body shifts onto forearms and knees, still supported by gravity but with less external assistance than before. The same exhale, the same inward draw of the lower abdomen, the same brief backward drop of the rib cage is repeated here. If this stage proves too easy, the next adjustment follows naturally, shifting onto hands and knees, increasing the demand further while keeping the same underlying breath pattern intact. Once these ground-based positions have been mastered, the body faces a new and more difficult challenge, transitioning onto its side. In this position, gravity no longer offers the same forward-leaning assistance. The body must begin holding the new rib position with less external support. This typically starts with a simple side-supported posture, hand and forearm pressing into the ground, before progressing toward a position where the chest turns slightly downward, bridging the gap between full ground support and true side-lying independence. The breath sequence does not change, only the level of physical demand increases, testing whether the earlier stages truly created lasting change or only temporary compliance. The most difficult stage in this entire progression takes place lying on the back. Here, gravity works directly against the correction, pulling the rib cage toward its old forward flared position more than in any previous stage. This is precisely why it comes last. In this position, the knees are bent, feet flat, with light pressure directed downward through the feet, just enough to engage the muscles of the hips and lower body, without forcing an arch into the lower back. The same exhale sequence is applied, drawing the lower abdomen inward, allowing the rib cage to settle backward on its own, rather than being pushed there by force. For those whose progress has plateaued at this stage, a controlled reach of the arm, extended carefully overhead, can accelerate the same result without reintroducing the old compensations already identified as failures. Once this final stage has been mastered while lying still, one essential question remains. Correction achieved only in stillness holds limited practical value. Real life does not happen lying down. It happens standing, moving, lifting, and reacting under load. This is why the final phase of the protocol shifts into functional movement. A controlled pressing motion, performed from a kneeling position, becomes the proving ground. Before the motion begins, a single inhale is taken, silent and controlled. As the weight is pressed forward, A slow, complete exhale accompanies the movement, maintaining the same rib position established through weeks of ground-based practice, even as the body works against external resistance. If the position holds, without the shoulders rounding forward, without the lower back arching to compensate, this confirms that the correction is no longer temporary. It has become structural. What began as a widely misunderstood condition, dismissed for years as permanent and unfixable, is revealed instead to be a reversible adaptation. Not a flaw in the body's design, but a response to force and therefore capable of being retrained through a different, more precise application of force. The rib flare does not represent a permanent verdict on how a person is built. It represents an unresolved pattern, one that responds directly and measurably to correct mechanical input. Applied consistently and in the correct sequence, this protocol does not simply mask the appearance of a rib flare. It addresses the underlying cause directly, offering a lasting resolution to a condition long assumed to have none.